You're pathetic, Emma. Honestly, I don't know how Victoria puts up with having you as a sister. That's what my sister's fiancé said to me at their engagement party, in front of 50 guests, while I stood there in my thrift store dress with paint still under my fingernails from my weekend art classes. What he didn't know was that in exactly 72 hours, he would be sitting across from me in the executive conference room of Meridian Creative Solutions, where I would be introduced as the creative director, his new boss. The same woman he had dismissed as a, quote, failed artist living in Fantasyland would now hold his career in her hands. But this isn't just about revenge. This is about what happens when society teaches us that our worth depends on other people's approval, and how recognizing your own value can transform not just your life, but the lives of everyone around you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The humiliation began the moment I walked into the grand ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Chicago. My sister Victoria had insisted on hosting her engagement party at one of the city's most prestigious venues, complete with crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and a guest list that read like a directory of Chicago's financial elite. I had spent 3 weeks preparing for this evening, not because I cared about impressing Victoria's friends, but because I knew this would be one of those family moments that gets referenced in conversations for years to come. I wanted to present the best version of myself, to show that despite taking a different path than my sister, I had built something meaningful with my life. My dress was a vintage emerald silk piece I had found at a consignment shop in Wicker Park, altered carefully to fit my frame perfectly. I had saved for 2 months to afford the matching shoes, and I had spent hours practicing conversations in my mirror, anticipating the questions about my career that would inevitably arise when I mingled with Victoria's corporate friends. What I had not anticipated was the systematic campaign of dismissal that would begin the moment I approached the registration table. Emma Hartwell, I told the young woman checking in guests, a blonde with the kind of precise makeup that suggested professional application. She scanned her list twice, frowning slightly. I don't see you here. Are you sure you're on the guest list? I'm the bride's sister, I replied, maintaining my smile despite the flutter of anxiety in my chest. Oh, she said, as if this explained the confusion. Let me check the family section. After another moment of searching, she found my name printed in smaller font at the bottom of the page. There you are. Table 12. Table 12 turned out to be positioned near the kitchen doors, far from the head table where Victoria and her fiancé would be seated. As I made my way across the ballroom, I noticed the careful orchestration of social hierarchy reflected in the seating arrangement. The closest tables to the front were reserved for partners from Victoria's law firm, executives from her fiancé's investment company, and family friends who moved in similar professional circles. My table included Victoria's college roommate who worked as a social worker, a cousin who taught middle school mathematics, and several family friends whose careers would be considered admirable but not particularly prestigious in this environment. The message was clear without being explicitly stated. I was welcome at this celebration, but my place in the hierarchy had been carefully established. Victoria appeared radiant as she moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and displaying her engagement ring with the practiced grace of someone who had always understood how to navigate social situations to her advantage. She wore a white designer cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and her hair had been styled by someone who understood how to create the kind of effortless elegance that actually requires considerable effort and expense. When she finally made her way to my table, her smile was warm but brief. Emma, you made it. I wasn't sure you would come. Of course I came. You're my sister. I know, but I thought you might be busy with your art projects, or whatever it is you do in that studio apartment. The dismissal was gentle but unmistakable. Victoria had never understood my decision to pursue creative work over traditional career advancement, and she had long ago stopped pretending that she viewed my choices as valid alternatives to her own path. Actually, I've been working on some exciting projects lately, I began, hoping to share some of the professional developments that had been occupying my time. That's nice, Victoria replied, but her attention had already shifted to someone approaching from behind me. "Oh, there's someone I want you to meet. Emma, this is my fiancé, Richard Blackwood." Richard Blackwood was exactly what I had expected based on Victoria's descriptions. Tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confident bearing that comes from a lifetime of having doors opened by family connections and inherited advantages. He worked as a senior analyst at Cornerstone Investments, one of Chicago's most prestigious financial firms, and he carried himself with the assurance of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged in elite professional environments. "So this is the artist sister I've heard about," he said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Emma," I replied, accepting the handshake while noting the way his gaze quickly assessed my appearance and found it somehow wanting. "Victoria tells me you do painting or something like that. How interesting." The phrase, "or something like that," carried enough dismissive weight to make clear that whatever I did was neither understood nor respected by this man who would soon become my brother-in-law. "I work in digital media and creative strategy," I explained. "I've been developing multimedia campaigns for various clients." "Ah, freelance work," Richard said, as if this explained everything. "That must be challenging. Very unstable, I imagine." "No benefits, no security, no clear advancement path. It has its challenges," I admitted, "but it also provides opportunities for creative fulfillment and intellectual growth that traditional corporate structures don't always offer." Richard's laugh was polite, but clearly amused by what he perceived as naive idealism. "Well, that's certainly one way to look at it, though I imagine at some point practical considerations become important. Family planning, mortgage applications, retirement savings. These things require predictable income and established career trajectories." Victoria nodded in agreement, and I realized this conversation had been choreographed in advance. They had discussed my career choices and concluded that this engagement party would be an appropriate venue for encouraging me to reconsider my priorities. "I understand the importance of financial stability," I replied carefully. "I've been fortunate to build a client base that provides consistent work and allows me to develop specialized expertise in my field." "And what field is that, exactly?" Richard asked with the tone of someone who was confident that my answer would only reinforce his point about the impracticality of creative careers. "I specialize in brand development and creative strategy for emerging companies. I help organizations understand how to communicate their values and objectives through visual and digital media." Richard exchanged a glance with Victoria that suggested they found this explanation somewhat pretentious. "Brand development," he repeated. "So you make logos and websites?" The reduction of my work to its most basic elements was clearly intended to demonstrate the limited scope and importance of what I did compared to Richard's work managing investment portfolios for wealthy clients. "Among other things," I said, "I also develop comprehensive creative strategies that help companies establish market positioning and build customer relationships." "That sounds very creative," Richard said with the kind of patronizing tone usually reserved for children describing imaginary games. "But tell me, how do you measure success in that kind of work? I mean, in finance, we have clear metrics: profit margins, return on investment, portfolio performance. These are objective measures that demonstrate value creation. Creative work has different metrics," I replied. "Brand recognition, customer engagement, market differentiation. These outcomes can be measured, but they often develop over longer time periods than quarterly financial reports." Richard nodded as if he was seriously considering my explanation, but his expression suggested he was merely indulging a fantasy rather than engaging with legitimate professional concepts. "The challenge with creative work," he continued, "is that it's so subjective. What one person considers brilliant, another person might find completely unappealing. It's difficult to build a stable career on something so dependent on personal taste and aesthetic preferences." Victoria joined the conversation at this point. "Richard makes a good point, Emma. I worry about your long-term security. You're 32 now, and you're still living in that tiny apartment in Logan Square. Most people your age are thinking about buying homes, starting families, building assets." The criticism was framed as concern, but the underlying message was clear. My life choices were viewed as an extended adolescence that I should have outgrown years ago. I appreciate your concern, I said, but I'm building something meaningful. My work allows me to help organizations communicate important messages and connect with their communities. That has value beyond just financial returns. Richard's smile became more condescending. Of course it has personal value for you, and that's important. But at some point, don't you think you should consider more practical career options? There are entry-level positions at established companies that could provide the stability and advancement opportunities that freelance creative work simply can't offer. Entry-level positions, I repeated. You mean starting over in a different field after spending 8 years developing expertise in my current area? Think of it as a career pivot rather than starting over, Victoria suggested. You have a college degree, you're intelligent. You could probably find opportunities in marketing departments at established companies. Regular salary, benefits, clear advancement paths. The conversation had evolved from polite inquiry to active intervention, with both Victoria and Richard apparently convinced that this engagement party was an appropriate setting for encouraging me to abandon my career and seek employment in a field they considered more respectable. I understand your perspective, I said, but I'm actually quite satisfied with my current trajectory. My client base is growing, my projects are becoming more sophisticated, and I'm developing expertise that positions me well for future opportunities. Richard's expression shifted from condescending amusement to mild irritation. Emma, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but sometimes people who aren't succeeding in traditional career paths convince themselves that alternative approaches are equally valid. It's a form of rationalization that allows them to avoid confronting the reality that their choices aren't working. The insult was delivered with the kind of calm certainty that made it particularly stinging. Richard wasn't angry or emotional, he was simply stating what he believed to be an obvious truth about my situation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria looked uncomfortable with her fiancé's directness, but she didn't contradict him. Her silence communicated agreement, even if she wouldn't have phrased the criticism quite so bluntly. I appreciate your feedback, I said, working to keep my voice steady, but I think you might be making assumptions about my situation that aren't necessarily accurate. What assumptions? Richard asked. You're 32, living in a studio apartment, working freelance creative projects without benefits or job security. These aren't assumptions. These are facts. They're facts without context, I replied. You're evaluating my choices based on your priorities and values, but those might not be the most relevant framework for assessing my situation. Richard's laugh was shorter and less polite than before. Emma, there are objective measures of professional success that transcend personal values. Financial stability, career advancement, social recognition, asset accumulation. These things matter regardless of how someone feels about them personally. And you believe I'm failing by those measures? I'm suggesting that your current approach isn't likely to achieve those outcomes, Richard said. Which means at some point you'll need to reconsider your priorities if you want to build a meaningful adult life. The phrase meaningful adult life was delivered with particular emphasis, making clear that Richard viewed my current situation as an extended form of immaturity that would eventually require correction. Victoria placed her hand on my arm in what was probably intended as a comforting gesture. We just want you to be happy and secure, Emma. We're not trying to be critical, we're trying to be supportive. I understand, I said, though I was beginning to realize that their version of support required me to acknowledge that my current path was fundamentally flawed. Richard checked his watch, a gesture that suggested he was ready to conclude this conversation and move on to more important social obligations. Look, Emma, he said, I hope you'll think about what we've discussed. Victoria and I have connections in the business community that could be helpful if you decide you're ready to pursue more traditional career opportunities. But that would require acknowledging that your current approach isn't sustainable. You're saying you would help me find a job if I admitted that my current career is a failure? I'm saying we could provide networking opportunities if you demonstrated genuine interest in building a stable professional foundation, Richard replied. But that would require approaching the job search with appropriate humility, rather than insisting that creative freelancing is equivalent to established career paths. The word humility was particularly loaded in this context, suggesting that my defense of my career choices represented arrogance rather than legitimate professional confidence. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I'm actually quite optimistic about my current trajectory." Richard's expression hardened slightly, as if my continued resistance to his guidance was becoming genuinely frustrating rather than merely misguided. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying a sharper edge than before, "I'm trying to be helpful here, but you're making it difficult. Your situation is objectively problematic, and pretending otherwise doesn't change that reality." "My situation is objectively different from yours," I corrected. "That doesn't necessarily make it problematic." "You're 32 years old," Richard said, his patience clearly exhausted. "You live in a studio apartment, you have no stable income, no benefits, no retirement savings, no assets, no clear career advancement path. In what universe is that not problematic?" The public nature of this dressing down was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Other guests at nearby tables were beginning to notice the tension in our conversation, and I could see Victoria's growing anxiety about the scene her fiancé was creating at their engagement party. "Richard," Victoria said quietly, "maybe we should." "No, Victoria," Richard interrupted. "Your sister needs to hear this. Someone needs to tell her the truth about her situation, instead of enabling this fantasy that creative freelancing is a legitimate career path." He turned back to me with the kind of expression usually reserved for correcting a child who refuses to acknowledge obvious mistakes. "Emma, you're pathetic," he said, his voice carrying across the surrounding tables. "Honestly, I don't know how Victoria puts up with having you as a sister. You're 32 years old, living like a college student, clinging to artistic dreams that clearly aren't working out, and refusing to acknowledge that you need to grow up and join the real world." The word pathetic landed like a physical blow, made worse by the public nature of its delivery. Conversations at nearby tables stopped as guests turned to observe what was clearly a family confrontation that had escalated beyond appropriate bounds for a social celebration. Victoria's face had gone pale, and she was looking back and forth between Richard and me as if trying to determine how to manage a situation that had spiraled beyond her control. "Richard, that's enough," she said, but her voice lacked the authority to stop him. "No, it's not enough," Richard continued, apparently convinced that public humiliation would succeed where gentler persuasion had failed. "She needs to understand that there are consequences for refusing to take responsibility for her life. She can't keep pretending that finger painting and making websites is equivalent to building a real career." The reduction of my work to, quote, finger painting and making websites was clearly calculated to maximize humiliation while demonstrating Richard's complete dismissal of creative professions as legitimate forms of employment. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of 50 pairs of eyes observing my response to this very public character assassination. The smart thing would have been to excuse myself gracefully, to avoid escalating the confrontation further, to preserve what remained of the family celebration that Victoria had spent months planning. But something inside me had reached a breaking point that extended beyond this particular evening, or this specific insult. This moment represented every time someone had dismissed my choices, every assumption about my capabilities based on my appearance or living situation, every conversation where my perspective had been discounted because I hadn't followed a traditional professional trajectory. "You're right, Richard," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "I haven't followed a traditional career path. I haven't prioritized financial accumulation over creative fulfillment. I haven't measured my worth by the size of my apartment or the prestige of my employer." Richard's expression suggested he was pleased that I was finally acknowledging what he considered obvious truths about my situation. "But what you don't understand," I continued, "is that non-traditional paths sometimes lead to destinations that traditional approaches can't reach. And sometimes the person you're dismissing as pathetic is actually positioned to change your life in ways you haven't anticipated." Richard's confident smile faltered slightly, as if he was beginning to sense that this conversation might not conclude the way he had expected. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. "It means," I said, looking directly into his eyes with the kind of steady gaze I had learned from years of client presentations. That appearances can be deceiving, and that your assumptions about my situation might not be as accurate as you believe. "Emma," Victoria said nervously, "what are you talking about?" I smiled for the first time since this conversation began. Not because I was happy, but because I was finally ready to stop accepting other people's definitions of my worth and start trusting in the value I had spent 8 years building. I'm talking about the fact that sometimes the person you think you understand completely is actually someone you've never bothered to really see, I said. And sometimes that oversight has consequences that extend beyond hurt feelings at engagement parties. Richard was looking at me with the kind of confusion that occurs when confident predictions suddenly seem less certain than they had moments before. "I have no idea what you're trying to say," he said. "I am saying," I replied, "that Monday morning is going to be very interesting for both of us." The cryptic nature of this statement was intentional. I wanted Richard to spend the rest of the weekend wondering what I meant, questioning his assumptions about my situation, perhaps even beginning to doubt the certainty with which he had dismissed my professional capabilities. But I wasn't ready to reveal the full truth yet. That would come in 72 hours, in a conference room where the power dynamics would be completely reversed, where the woman he had called pathetic would demonstrate exactly how mistaken his assessment had been. For now, it was enough to plant the seed of doubt, to suggest that his understanding of the situation might be incomplete, to hint that Monday would bring revelations that would force him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about me. Because what Richard didn't know, what Victoria didn't know, what none of the guests at this engagement party could have imagined, was that I had spent the previous 6 months in final negotiations with Meridian Creative Solutions to become their new creative director. The contract had been signed 3 days earlier. My start date was Monday morning. And Richard Blackwood, senior analyst at Cornerstone Investments, had just accepted a position as account manager at Meridian Creative Solutions, where his first assignment would be reporting to the creative director. The pathetic sister with the studio apartment and the finger painting hobby was about to become his boss. This story isn't about revenge, though I admit the timing was poetic in ways I could never have planned. This story is about the danger of judging people based on limited information, the importance of recognizing that success takes many forms, and the transformative power of understanding your own worth regardless of other people's opinions. It's about what happens when society teaches us that certain paths are more valuable than others, and how that conditioning can blind us to the potential that exists in unconventional places. It's about the courage required to trust your own vision of success when everyone around you suggests you should abandon your dreams and accept more traditional definitions of achievement. Most importantly, it's about understanding that your value doesn't depend on other people's recognition, even when those people are family members who should know you better than strangers. The woman Richard called pathetic that evening was already the person who would change his professional trajectory 3 days later. The dismissal didn't create my capabilities. It simply revealed the blindness that prevented him from recognizing capabilities that already existed. That blindness would prove costly in ways he couldn't have imagined when he decided that a family celebration was an appropriate venue for publicly humiliating someone whose situation he had completely misunderstood. Because Monday morning was coming, and with it, the revelation that would force everyone at that engagement party to reconsider their assumptions about success, worth, and the danger of underestimating people whose paths don't match conventional expectations. The pathetic sister was about to become the boss. And the lessons learned in that transformation would prove valuable for everyone watching this unfold. Growing up as the second daughter in the Hartwell family meant learning early that love could be conditional, success had narrow definitions, and worthiness required constant proof through achievements that others could easily recognize and validate. My education in invisibility began not through dramatic confrontations or obvious neglect, but through the subtle, persistent message that my value depended entirely on how well I could mirror the expectations of people who had never bothered to understand who I actually was. Victoria was born 18 months before me, emerging into the world with the kind of innate confidence that would carry her effortlessly through private school admissions, college applications, and eventually into the legal profession, where her ability to command rooms full of skeptical attorneys would be viewed as natural talent rather than learned behavior. She possessed what our parents called presence, that indefinable quality that made people listen when she spoke, defer to her judgment in group decisions, and assume she would succeed at whatever she attempted. I, on the other hand, was born observant. While Victoria learned to capture attention, I learned to pay attention. While she developed the skills necessary for commanding social situations, I developed the ability to understand them. These different approaches to navigating the world would eventually prove equally valuable, but during childhood and adolescence, only one received recognition and encouragement. Our father, Jonathan Hartwell, built his career as a corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions, spending his days negotiating deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and his evenings networking with other professionals who measured success through billable hours and partnership tracks. He was brilliant at his work, respected by his colleagues, and completely mystified by any form of achievement that could not be quantified through traditional metrics. When Victoria announced her intention to study law, our father's pride was immediate and unqualified. Here was validation that his approach to life had been correct, proof that at least one of his daughters understood the importance of building a career that would provide security, status, and social recognition. Their conversations about legal strategy, career advancement, and professional networking became a bonding ritual that excluded me not through malicious intent, but through the simple reality that I had nothing to contribute to discussions about topics that held no interest for me. Our mother, Catherine, had abandoned her own career as a graphic designer when Victoria was born, channeling her creative energy into managing household aesthetics and social obligations, with the same meticulous attention she had once applied to commercial design projects. She understood creative work in theory, but she had learned through experience that artistic careers were luxuries that practical families could not afford to prioritize. When I showed early interest in drawing, painting, and visual storytelling, her response was encouraging but carefully modulated. Art was acceptable as a hobby, valuable as a form of personal expression, and potentially useful as a supplement to more practical career preparation. However, she made clear through countless small comments and suggestions that creative interests should never become the primary focus of serious life planning. This perspective shaped every conversation about my future from middle school through college graduation. When I expressed interest in art classes, the response was supportive as long as I maintained equal focus on more traditional academic subjects. When I considered applying to art schools, the family discussion centered on the importance of having backup plans and practical alternatives that would ensure financial stability regardless of how artistic pursuits developed. The message was never explicitly stated, but it permeated every discussion about my education and career development. Creative work was inherently unstable, financially unreliable, and socially less prestigious than traditional professional paths. People who chose artistic careers were either independently wealthy enough to afford such luxuries or insufficiently practical to understand the importance of economic security. This conditioning created a persistent internal conflict between my genuine interests and my family's expectations that would influence my decisions for decades. I learned to apologize for my preferences, to justify my choices through frameworks that others would find acceptable, and to constantly question whether my instincts about my own capabilities and interests could be trusted. The pattern established itself clearly during my sophomore year of high school, when I submitted a portfolio to a prestigious summer art program that accepted only 30 students from across the Midwest. The acceptance letter arrived on the same day Victoria received notification that she had been selected for a competitive internship at a downtown law firm. The family celebration that evening focused entirely on Victoria's achievement. Her internship represented obvious progress toward a clearly defined career goal, provided networking opportunities with established professionals, and demonstrated her ability to compete successfully against other ambitious students with similar aspirations. The accomplishment was concrete, measurable, and easily understood by relatives and family friends who would inquire about our summer plans. My acceptance to the art program, while mentioned briefly during dinner conversation, was treated as a pleasant surprise rather than a significant achievement. The program was described as a briefly rather than recognition of exceptional creative potential. The underlying assumption was that while art programs might be personally fulfilling, they were not particularly relevant to serious future planning. This disparity in recognition taught me that achievements only mattered if they contributed to goals that others considered worthwhile. Creative accomplishments were acceptable as personal interests but not valuable as indicators of professional potential. The distinction seemed natural to everyone in my family except me, which led me to conclude that my perspective on the relative importance of creative work was somehow flawed rather than simply different. The summer art program proved transformative in ways I could not have anticipated. For 6 weeks, I was surrounded by other young people who shared my interest in visual storytelling, who understood the intellectual challenges involved in translating abstract concepts into compelling imagery, and who viewed creative problem-solving as a legitimate form of intelligence rather than an amusing hobby. More importantly, the program was taught by professional artists and designers who had built successful careers around creative work. They discussed their projects with the same seriousness and analytical rigor that my father applied to legal cases, demonstrating that artistic careers could be approached with strategic thinking, methodical skill development, and long-term professional planning. These instructors became the first adults in my life who treated my creative interests as potentially significant rather than merely charming. They offered constructive criticism that challenged me to improve, rather than generic praise that suggested improvement was unnecessary. They discussed career development strategies specific to creative fields, introduced concepts of professional portfolio development, and provided examples of how artistic skills could be applied in commercial contexts. For the first time, I encountered a community where my natural abilities were recognized as strengths, rather than pleasant diversions from more important concerns. The validation was intoxicating, but it also created a painful contrast with the environment I returned to at the end of the summer. My family's response to my enthusiasm about the program was politely supportive but fundamentally unchanged. They were pleased that I had enjoyed the experience, interested in seeing some of the work I had created, and completely unaware that those 6 weeks had fundamentally altered my understanding of my own potential. When I attempted to share what I had learned about professional opportunities in creative fields, the response was gentle but firm redirection toward more practical considerations. Art could remain an important part of my life, but it should not become the central focus of my education or career planning. College applications should prioritize schools with strong liberal arts programs that would provide broad-based preparation for various professional possibilities, rather than specialized art schools that might limit my future options. The guidance was offered with loving concern for my long-term welfare, but it required me to abandon the vision of my future that had developed during those transformative summer weeks. I was being asked to choose between my family's approval and my own sense of authentic direction, between the security of meeting their expectations and the uncertainty of pursuing goals they could not understand or support. The decision I made at 17 would influence every major choice I faced for the next 15 years. I chose family harmony over personal authenticity, applying to traditional 4-year universities with strong academic reputations, rather than specialized programs that would have nurtured my creative development. Northwestern University accepted me into their liberal arts program, with a generous financial aid package that my parents viewed as validation of their guidance. Here was proof that practical planning produced concrete results, that focusing on traditional academic achievement created opportunities that artistic pursuits could never provide. I enrolled as an English major with the vague intention of eventually pursuing graduate work in literature, or perhaps journalism, fields that would allow me to maintain some connection to creative expression, while satisfying my family's preference for careers with clear professional trajectories. However, the universe had different plans. During my freshman year, I discovered that Northwestern had recently launched an innovative program in digital media design, combining traditional artistic training with emerging technologies in ways that prepared students for careers in fields that barely existed when I was applying to colleges. The program was housed within the university's technology department rather than the art school, which meant it carried more academic legitimacy in my family's perspective, while providing exactly the kind of creative and technical training that aligned with my genuine interests and natural abilities. For the first time since high school, I found myself in an educational environment that valued creative problem-solving as intellectual work rather than pleasant recreation. The coursework required mastery of complex software applications, understanding of design principles that applied across multiple media platforms, and development of strategic thinking skills that could be applied to real-world communication challenges. More importantly, The program attracted students and faculty who understood that creative work in the digital age required the same analytical rigor and professional development approach as traditional business or technical careers. Success in this field demanded continuous learning, strategic career planning, and sophisticated understanding of how visual communication influenced human behavior and decision-making processes. My grades reflected my engagement with material that finally challenged me in ways that felt meaningful rather than merely obligatory. For the first time since elementary school, I was learning information that I genuinely wanted to master, rather than content I needed to memorize for examinations that would determine my access to future opportunities. The transformation was noticed by professors, who began encouraging me to consider graduate work or professional opportunities that would build on the foundation I was developing. By my junior year, I was working as a teaching assistant for introductory design courses and completing freelance projects for local businesses that needed help developing digital marketing materials. These early professional experiences provided my first taste of the satisfaction that comes from applying creative skills to solve real-world problems for clients who genuinely needed assistance. Unlike academic projects that existed primarily as exercises in skill development, this work had immediate practical application and measurable impact on the success of small businesses that could not afford expensive marketing agencies. I discovered that I possessed not only creative abilities, but also strategic thinking skills that allowed me to understand clients' objectives and develop solutions that served their business needs while expressing their organizational values through compelling visual communication. The combination of artistic sensibility and analytical problem-solving created opportunities that neither purely creative nor purely business-focused approaches could have provided. I was developing a hybrid skill set that would prove valuable in professional contexts that required both aesthetic judgment and strategic thinking. By my senior year, I had built a small but consistent client base that provided enough income to cover my living expenses while completing my degree. The work was challenging, intellectually stimulating, and financially sustainable in ways that contradicted everything my family had predicted about creative careers. However, the success created new tensions with family expectations. My parents were pleased that I was earning money and developing professional experience, but they remained concerned that I was investing too much energy in work that might not lead to long-term career stability. Their preferred scenario involved my using the digital media experience as preparation for positions in established corporations, where I could apply creative skills within structured business environments. Marketing departments at major companies offered the kind of predictable advancement opportunities and comprehensive benefits that creative freelancing could never provide. These conversations forced me to confront fundamental questions about success, security, and authenticity that would influence my decisions for years to come. Was my family correct that creative freelancing was inherently unstable and professionally limiting? Were my positive experiences with independent creative work simply the result of beginner's luck that would not sustain over time? Could I build a meaningful career around work that provided personal fulfillment but might never offer the kind of social recognition and financial security that traditional professional paths provided? The answers to these questions would determine not only my career trajectory, but also my relationship with my family and my understanding of my own value and potential. The young woman who had learned to apologize for her creative interests would need to develop the confidence to trust her own assessment of her abilities and professional prospects. This internal struggle between authentic self-expression and external validation would define my 20s and early 30s, influencing every major decision about work, relationships, and personal development. The girl who had learned that her interests were somehow less valuable than her sisters' would need to unlearn those lessons before she could recognize her own worth. The process would prove challenging, lonely, and ultimately transformative in ways that would surprise everyone who thought they understood my potential and limitations. Chicago's business district operates according to unwritten rules that determine who belongs in glass-walled conference rooms and who remains invisible in the background, ensuring that the machinery of commerce functions smoothly without acknowledging the full humanity of everyone who makes it possible. The financial and professional services sector, where both my sister Victoria and her fiancé Richard had built their careers, represented the apex of this hierarchical system, a world where success was measured through easily quantifiable metrics and legitimacy depended on credentials that could be verified through standardized databases. Meridian Creative Solutions occupied the 34th through 37th floors of the Millennium Center, a gleaming tower that rose above the Chicago River like a monument to the city's transformation from industrial powerhouse to white-collar economic engine. The building housed law firms, investment companies, consulting agencies, and technology startups, organizations that sold expertise rather than manufactured products, creating value through intellectual labor that commanded premium pricing in the global marketplace. The physical environment communicated status through architectural details that required significant investment to achieve. Marble lobbies, hardwood reception areas, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views, conference rooms equipped with video conferencing technology that enabled real-time collaboration with clients across multiple continents. These design elements served functional purposes, but they also established psychological frameworks that reinforced social hierarchies and professional expectations. Employees who worked in such environments understood that their daily behavior contributed to carefully maintained corporate images that influenced client relationships, business development opportunities, and competitive positioning within industries where reputation determined success more than any other factor. The pressure to conform to established professional norms created cultures where individual expression was subordinated to organizational branding requirements. Within this ecosystem, creative professionals occupied an interesting position that reflected broader cultural tensions about the value of artistic work in business contexts. Companies like Meridian Creative Solutions existed to help other organizations communicate effectively through visual and digital media, which meant creative skills were recognized as necessary for competitive success. However, the business model required translating artistic sensibilities into deliverable products that could be marketed, sold, and evaluated according to conventional performance metrics. This translation process often created conflicts between creative integrity and commercial viability that reflected deeper questions about whether artistic work could maintain its essential character when subjected to corporate management structures. The most successful creative professionals learned to navigate these tensions by developing hybrid skill sets that combined aesthetic judgment with strategic business thinking. But this adaptation required abandoning certain romantic notions about artistic independence that many creative people held dear. My own entry into this world had been gradual and somewhat accidental, beginning with freelance projects during college that evolved into more substantial client relationships after graduation. Rather than seeking employment with established agencies, I had built an independent practice that allowed me to work directly with small businesses and nonprofit organizations that needed creative assistance but could not afford the premium pricing charged by major marketing firms. This approach provided valuable experience working with diverse clients who had different objectives, budgets, and aesthetic preferences. I learned to understand business problems from multiple perspectives, to communicate complex design concepts in language that non-creative decision-makers could understand, and to develop solutions that served clients' strategic needs while reflecting their organizational values. The freelance model also required developing entrepreneurial skills that traditional employment relationships might not have provided. I learned to manage client relationships, handle project timelines, negotiate contracts, and build a personal brand that attracted referrals and repeat business. These capabilities proved essential preparation for eventually transitioning to roles that required both creative expertise and business leadership. However, the independent approach also meant operating outside the professional networks that typically provided career advancement opportunities in creative industries. While my college classmates were building relationships within established agencies, learning industry standard practices, and gaining access to high-profile projects that enhanced their professional reputations, I was working primarily with clients who needed basic design services rather than sophisticated brand strategy development. This isolation from mainstream creative industry culture created both advantages and disadvantages that would influence my career trajectory for years. The independence allowed me to develop a distinctive approach to creative problem solving that was not constrained by agency methodologies or client expectations shaped by conventional marketing practices. However, it also meant that my work was not visible to creative directors at major firms who might have recognized my potential and offered opportunities for professional advancement. The tension between independence and industry integration reflected broader questions about career development that affected many creative professionals who chose non-traditional paths. Was it better to gain experience within established organizations that provided mentorship, resources, and professional credibility, or to maintain creative autonomy by working independently with clients who valued individual artistic vision over corporate branding consistency? My decision to prioritize independence over institutional affiliation was influenced partly by family dynamics that had taught me to question whether I would ever receive fair recognition within hierarchical organizations that rewarded conformity more than innovation. The years of being overlooked in family settings had created skepticism about my ability to thrive in professional environments where advancement depended on political skills and social connections rather than purely merit-based evaluation. This skepticism proved both protective and limiting. It motivated me to develop self-reliance and entrepreneurial capabilities that served me well in independent practice. But it also prevented me from seeking opportunities that might have accelerated my professional development through exposure to more sophisticated projects and higher-caliber colleagues. The creative industry in Chicago during the early 2010s was experiencing significant transformation as digital technologies disrupted traditional advertising and marketing approaches. Social media platforms were creating new opportunities for direct brand-to-consumer communication that bypassed conventional media channels. Mobile computing was enabling location-based marketing strategies that required integration of creative content with data analytics. E-commerce was driving demand for user experience design that combined aesthetic appeal with functional effectiveness. These technological shifts created opportunities for creative professionals who could understand both artistic principles and digital implementation requirements. However, the rapid pace of change also meant that traditional portfolio development approaches were becoming less relevant, as client needs evolved faster than educational institutions could adapt their curricula. Freelance practitioners like myself were often better positioned to experiment with emerging technologies and unconventional client solutions because we were not constrained by agency policies or established client relationships that might limit creative exploration. The independence that seemed like a career disadvantage in traditional terms actually provided flexibility that proved valuable in adapting to industry transformation. My client base during this period reflected the diversity of organizations that were struggling to adapt their communication strategies to digital environments. Small retail businesses needed e-commerce websites that could compete with major online marketplaces. Nonprofit organizations required social media campaigns that could engage younger donors who consumed information differently than previous generations. Professional service providers wanted personal branding strategies that could differentiate them in competitive markets. Each project required understanding specific business challenges while developing creative solutions that addressed both aesthetic and functional requirements. The variety of client types and project scopes provided education in business strategy, consumer psychology, and technology implementation that would have been difficult to acquire through traditional employment relationships. However, the project-based nature of freelance work also created financial instability and professional isolation that reflected broader challenges facing independent creative professionals. Client relationships were temporary and project-focused rather than ongoing and developmental. Income fluctuated based on market conditions and client budgets that I could not control. Professional growth depended entirely on self-directed learning rather than mentorship or structured advancement opportunities. These challenges were compounded by social perceptions that treated freelance creative work as inherently less serious than traditional employment relationships. Friends and family members often viewed my independent practice as an extended form of experimentation that would eventually require transition to more conventional career arrangements. The assumption was that creative freelancing represented delayed professional development, rather than a legitimate alternative approach to building expertise and financial stability. The persistent questioning of my career choices created ongoing pressure to justify decisions that felt appropriate based on my direct experience, but seemed questionable when evaluated according to conventional success metrics. The gap between my personal satisfaction with my work and others' concerns about my professional trajectory generated constant, internal conflict that affected both my confidence and my relationship with family members who wanted to see me succeed according to their definitions of success. This dynamic was particularly pronounced in professional social settings, where career advancement was a common topic of conversation. While my sister Victoria could easily explain her trajectory through law school, associate positions, and partnership track development, My career path required more complex explanation that often left listeners uncertain about whether my choices represented strategic planning or simply avoidance of traditional professional commitments. The social awkwardness of these interactions reinforced my tendency to avoid professional networking events and industry gatherings where career development was a primary focus. This avoidance further isolated me from opportunities that might have provided access to larger projects, strategic partnerships, or employment relationships that could have accelerated my professional growth. The irony was that my work was becoming increasingly sophisticated and financially successful, even as my professional reputation remained largely invisible to the broader creative industry community. Clients were referring other clients at an accelerating rate. Project budgets were growing as I demonstrated capability to handle more complex assignments. Strategic consultation was becoming a larger component of client relationships, as businesses recognized the value of my analytical approach to creative problem solving. However, these positive developments were occurring within a client network that remained separate from the mainstream creative industry infrastructure. The small businesses and nonprofit organizations that comprised my primary client base operated in different professional circles than the major corporations and established institutions that provided prestige projects for creative agencies. This separation meant that my professional achievements were not visible to creative directors, industry publications, or award programs that might have provided broader recognition for innovative work. The success was real and financially meaningful, but it remained largely invisible to the professional community that determined industry reputation and career advancement opportunities. The invisibility was particularly frustrating because it meant that my family's concerns about my career trajectory appeared justified, even as my actual professional situation was becoming increasingly stable and successful. From their perspective, I was still the freelance creative professional, working from a small apartment, taking on projects that seemed small-scale compared to Victoria's corporate legal work. They could not see the strategic complexity of helping diverse organizations develop comprehensive communication strategies, the business development skills required to build and maintain a growing client base, or the technological expertise necessary to implement creative solutions across multiple digital platforms. The work appeared simple because they lacked the framework for understanding its actual sophistication and market value. This misunderstanding was about to change in ways that none of us could have anticipated, as my invisible success was about to intersect with the highly visible professional world where Victoria and Richard had built their careers. The convergence would reveal just how much my family had misunderstood both my capabilities and my professional trajectory. The freelance creative professional they viewed as struggling to establish a legitimate career was actually positioned to transform how established businesses approach strategic communication challenges. The independence they worried about had actually provided preparation for leadership responsibilities that traditional employment relationships might not have offered. The world that had overlooked me was about to discover that invisibility could be a strategic advantage rather than a professional limitation. The education I received while building my freelance practice was unlike anything offered in traditional academic or corporate training programs. Every client interaction became a masterclass in human psychology, business strategy, and creative problem solving that required real-time adaptation to circumstances I could never have anticipated. The stakes were immediate and personal. My reputation, income, and professional future depended on successfully navigating challenges that had no predetermined solutions or institutional support systems. My first major client, Midwest Community Kitchen, represented the kind of organization that established creative agencies typically avoided due to limited budgets and complex stakeholder dynamics. The nonprofit operated 3 food distribution centers across Chicago's South Side, serving families who struggled with food insecurity while managing volunteer coordination, donor relationships, and compliance with federal nutrition program requirements. Their communication needs encompassed everything from volunteer recruitment materials to grant application presentations, requiring creative solutions that addressed multiple audiences with different information needs and aesthetic preferences. The executive director, Maria Santos, had contacted me through a referral from my college portfolio instructor after their previous designer had relocated to Portland without completing several critical projects. The organization faced immediate deadlines for materials needed to support their annual fundraising campaign, which generated approximately 60% of their operating budget during the crucial year-end giving season. During our initial consultation, Maria explained that previous creative vendors had struggled to understand the organization's mission and constituency, often producing materials that appeared professionally polished but failed to communicate the authentic community connections that distinguished their work from larger, more institutional food assistance programs. The challenge was developing visual communication strategies that conveyed both organizational competence and grassroots authenticity, professional capability, and neighborhood accessibility. The project required extensive research into the communities served by each distribution center, interviews with staff members and volunteers who understood constituent needs and preferences, and analysis of communication approaches used by similar organizations that had achieved successful fundraising outcomes. Rather than applying predetermined design templates, I needed to develop creative strategies that reflected the specific cultural contexts and communication patterns of the populations the organization served. This research phase taught me systematic approaches to understanding client environments that would prove essential throughout my career. I learned to conduct stakeholder interviews that revealed underlying organizational dynamics and competing priorities. I developed frameworks for analyzing target audience characteristics that influenced design decisions about color palettes, typography choices, and messaging strategies. I discovered methods for evaluating existing communication materials to identify successful elements and areas requiring improvement. The analytical skills required for this process combined anthropological observation techniques with business strategy principles in ways that purely artistic training had not provided. Understanding how different demographic groups responded to visual information required knowledge of cultural psychology, socioeconomic factors, and cognitive processing differences that influenced communication effectiveness across diverse populations. The project's complexity increased when I discovered that the organization's stakeholders had fundamentally different perspectives on how their work should be represented publicly. Board members, who were primarily professionals from corporate and nonprofit management backgrounds, preferred communication materials that emphasized organizational efficiency, measurable outcomes, and systematic approaches to addressing food insecurity. Direct service staff and volunteers, who worked daily with community members, favored messaging that highlighted personal relationships, cultural sensitivity, and grassroots community organizing principles. These different perspectives reflected competing theories about nonprofit communication strategy that extended far beyond aesthetic preferences. The tension involved fundamental questions about whether organizations serving low-income communities should emphasize their professional capabilities to attract institutional funders or their community connections to maintain authentic relationships with the populations they served. Resolving this tension required developing communication strategies that addressed multiple audiences simultaneously, without compromising the integrity of messages directed toward any particular stakeholder group. The solution involved creating modular design systems that could be adapted for different communication contexts, while maintaining consistent organizational identity across all materials. The technical implementation of this approach required mastering design software applications and project management systems that allowed efficient production of multiple material variations, while ensuring quality control across diverse output formats. I learned to develop comprehensive brand guidelines that provided clear direction for future material development, while remaining flexible enough to accommodate evolving organizational needs and communication objectives. The project's success was measured not only through aesthetic appeal, but through measurable outcomes that demonstrated improved communication effectiveness. The annual fundraising campaign achieved 37% higher donation levels than the previous year, with particularly strong response rates from individual donors who had not previously contributed to the organization. Volunteer recruitment increased by 52% during the 6 months following implementation of new outreach materials. Grant applications that incorporated the revised presentation materials achieved approval rates significantly above organizational historical averages. These concrete results provided validation that creative work could produce measurable business outcomes when strategic thinking guided aesthetic decisions. The success also demonstrated that thorough research and analytical problem-solving could overcome budget limitations and resource constraints that might have prevented less strategic approaches from achieving meaningful impact. However, the project's most valuable outcome was the professional development it provided through exposure to complex organizational dynamics and multi-stakeholder communication challenges. I learned to facilitate discussions between groups with different priorities and communication preferences, developing diplomatic skills that proved essential for managing client relationships throughout my career. The experience also taught me systematic approaches to project management that ensured deliverable quality and timeline adherence despite resource limitations and competing demands on client attention. Working with nonprofit organizations required understanding funding cycles, board meeting schedules, and regulatory compliance requirements that influenced project timelines and approval processes in ways that commercial clients might not experience. My second major client relationship further expanded my understanding of business communication challenges while introducing me to technology implementation requirements that were becoming increasingly important in creative work. Chicago Urban Gardens was a social enterprise that operated hydroponic growing facilities in converted warehouse spaces, selling fresh produce to restaurants and farmers markets while providing job training programs for individuals transitioning from incarceration or substance abuse recovery programs. The organization's founder, David Chen, had engineering background and social entrepreneurship experience but limited knowledge of marketing communications or brand development. The business model required appealing to multiple stakeholder groups with different priorities. Restaurants needed reliable produce supply and competitive pricing. Community members wanted accessible, healthy food options and employment opportunities. Investors required evidence of financial sustainability and social impact measurement. The creative challenge involved developing communication strategies that addressed these different stakeholder needs, while maintaining consistent organizational messaging about the social enterprise's mission and operational approach. The solution required understanding both commercial marketing principles and social impact communication strategies, combining business development objectives with community organizing principles. The technical requirements involved creating digital platforms that supported e-commerce functionality, customer relationship management, and social impact reporting through integrated systems that provided seamless user experiences across different interaction types. Developing these capabilities required learning web development principles, database management basics, and user experience design methodologies that extended far beyond traditional graphic design training. The project introduced me to strategic business planning processes that examined market positioning, competitive analysis, and financial projection development as inputs to creative decision-making. Rather than treating visual identity as purely aesthetic consideration, the work required understanding how design choices influenced customer perception, purchasing behavior, and long-term brand equity development. This analytical approach to creative work distinguished my methodology from purely artistic practices while demonstrating that strategic thinking could enhance rather than constrain creative expression. The most effective design solutions emerged from thorough understanding of business objectives and target audience characteristics rather than predetermined aesthetic preferences or industry standard practices. The Chicago Urban Gardens project also provided exposure to startup culture and entrepreneurial decision-making processes that differed significantly from nonprofit organizational dynamics. Social enterprises required balancing commercial viability with social impact objectives, creating communication challenges that traditional business or nonprofit approaches might not address effectively. Working with entrepreneurs taught me to adapt creative strategies to rapidly changing business conditions, limited resource availability, and uncertain market responses that required flexible implementation approaches. The experience provided valuable preparation for eventually working with established businesses that faced similar adaptation challenges in competitive market environments. The project's success was demonstrated through measurable business outcomes that validated the strategic approach to creative problem-solving. Restaurant client acquisition increased by 83% during the first year following brand identity implementation. Community program enrollment exceeded capacity within 6 months of launching recruitment campaigns. Investor interest resulted in successful funding rounds that enabled facility expansion and program development. These results established my reputation within Chicago's social enterprise community, generating referrals to similar organizations that needed creative assistance with communication challenges that combined business development and social impact objectives. The referral network provided consistent project opportunities while exposing me to diverse organizational types and communication challenges that broadened my professional expertise. The variety of client types and project requirements created ongoing education in business strategy, organizational development, and communication theory that supplemented formal design training with practical knowledge about how creative work functioned within broader business and social contexts. Each project required understanding specific industry dynamics, regulatory environments, and stakeholder relationships that influenced creative strategy development. This experiential learning approach proved more comprehensive and immediately applicable than academic coursework might have provided. The knowledge was acquired through direct application to real-world challenges, with immediate consequences for both client success and my professional reputation. The motivation for mastering new concepts and skills was intrinsic and urgent, rather than abstract and theoretical. The diversity of project requirements also prevented specialization in any single industry or communication approach, creating broad-based expertise that enabled adaptation to various client types and business challenges. Rather than becoming an expert in nonprofit communication or social enterprise marketing, I developed systematic approaches to understanding organizational dynamics and communication needs that could be applied across different sectors and business models. This generalist approach differed from career development strategies that emphasized deepening expertise within particular specializations or industry niches. While specialization might have provided faster recognition within specific professional communities, the broad-based approach created flexibility and adaptability that proved valuable as business communication requirements evolved rapidly due to technological changes and shifting market conditions. The independent practice model also required developing entrepreneurial capabilities that traditional employment relationships might not have provided. Managing client relationships, project timelines, financial planning, and business development activities demanded skills that combined creative expertise with business administration competencies. These hybrid capabilities distinguished my professional profile from creative professionals who focused exclusively on artistic development or business professionals who lacked creative training. The combination provided unique value proposition that enabled serving client needs that might require both strategic thinking and creative implementation capabilities. The professional development occurred through direct experience rather than formal training programs, creating practical knowledge that was immediately applicable to client challenges. However, the experiential learning approach also meant operating without institutional support systems or mentorship relationships that might have accelerated certain aspects of professional development. The isolation inherent in independent practice required self-directed learning and problem-solving capabilities that built resilience and resourcefulness, but also created occasional uncertainty about whether my approaches aligned with industry best practices or emerging trends. The success of individual projects provided validation, but the lack of peer feedback and professional community integration sometimes created doubt about whether my methods would prove sustainable over time. These concerns would prove unfounded as my client base continued expanding and project complexity increased consistently over several years. The foundation built through diverse client experience and strategic problem-solving methodology prepared me for leadership opportunities that would eventually emerge in ways I could not have anticipated when I was learning to navigate the challenges of independent creative practice. The invisible education I received while building my freelance career provided preparation for corporate leadership responsibilities that traditional career development paths might not have offered. The combination of strategic thinking, client relationship management, and adaptive problem-solving created capabilities that would prove essential when the opportunity arose to transition from independent practice to organizational leadership roles within the established business community. The discovery that changed everything began with a simple design consultation request that arrived through my website contact form on a Tuesday morning in March. The sender identified themselves as Lauren Mitchell, Operations Manager at Meridian Creative Solutions, and the message requested a meeting to discuss potential collaboration opportunities on a project involving corporate identity development for a financial services client. The name Meridian Creative Solutions was familiar from industry publications and professional networking events, though I had never worked directly with the agency. They occupied a prominent position in Chicago's creative services landscape, handling major corporate accounts that included several Fortune 500 companies and high-profile nonprofit organizations. Their client roster represented exactly the kind of institutional relationships that freelance practitioners typically struggled to access without established industry connections or significant marketing budgets. My initial response to Lauren's inquiry was cautious optimism tempered by realistic expectations about the likely scope of any collaboration opportunity. Established agencies often contacted freelance specialists to handle overflow work or specialized project components that exceeded their internal capacity. But these arrangements typically involved execution of predetermined creative strategies, rather than strategic development responsibilities that might provide meaningful professional growth opportunities. However, the consultation request included details that suggested more substantial involvement than routine subcontracting arrangements. The project involved developing comprehensive brand identity systems for a client undergoing organizational restructuring that would affect multiple business units and stakeholder relationships. The timeline extended over 18 months with potential for ongoing relationship development beyond initial implementation phases. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at Meridian's offices in the Millennium Center, providing my first opportunity to observe their organizational culture and operational approach from an insider perspective. The building's 34th floor reception area communicated exactly the kind of professional sophistication that distinguished established agencies from independent practitioners, with minimalist design elements and carefully curated artwork that demonstrated aesthetic expertise without overwhelming visitors with excessive visual stimulation. Lauren Mitchell proved to be a woman in her early 40s with marketing communications background and agency management experience that spanned multiple creative disciplines. Her approach to the consultation combined business development professionalism with genuine curiosity about my creative methodology and client relationship management strategies. The conversation revealed that Meridian was experiencing significant growth in demand for strategic consulting services that required different expertise than traditional advertising and promotional campaign development. The specific project opportunity involved working with Cornerstone Investments, a financial services firm that was expanding their service offerings to include wealth management and estate planning capabilities, alongside their traditional investment advisory business. The organizational expansion required comprehensive communication strategy development that would unify previously separate business functions while maintaining distinct brand identities that serve different client segments and market positioning objectives. During the project briefing, Lauren explained that Cornerstone's leadership team had requested creative partnership with professionals who understood both financial services marketing requirements and strategic brand development principles that could support long-term business growth rather than short-term promotional campaigns. The client specifically wanted to work with creative professionals who could function as strategic consultants rather than vendors executing predetermined creative concepts. The opportunity represented exactly the kind of project that could demonstrate my capabilities for handling complex organizational communication challenges while providing exposure to corporate client environments that typically remained inaccessible to freelance practitioners. However, the project's scope and timeline also presented risks that required careful evaluation before committing to partnership arrangements with an established agency whose reputation and client relationships could be affected by collaboration outcomes. My questions during the consultation focused on understanding Meridian's expectations for the collaboration structure, decision-making authority distribution, and long-term relationship development possibilities beyond the initial Cornerstone project. Lauren's responses indicated that the agency was genuinely interested in building ongoing partnership relationships with creative professionals who could provide specialized expertise that complemented their existing capabilities, rather than simply expanding their production capacity for routine project execution. The conversation revealed that Meridian's leadership team had been evaluating their organizational structure and service delivery approach in response to evolving client needs that increasingly required strategic consulting capabilities alongside traditional creative services. The financial services sector particularly demanded creative professionals who understood complex regulatory environments, sophisticated client relationship dynamics, and multi-generational wealth transfer planning considerations that influenced communication strategy development. Lauren mentioned that the agency's founder and creative director had been specifically seeking creative professionals with demonstrated experience managing complex stakeholder relationships and developing communication strategies that addressed multiple audience segments simultaneously. My portfolio work with nonprofit organizations and social enterprises had attracted their attention because these projects required exactly the kind of strategic thinking and stakeholder management capabilities that their corporate clients increasingly demanded. The project briefing continued with detailed information about cornerstone investments, organizational structure, client demographics, and competitive positioning within Chicago's financial services market. The firm managed approximately $2 billion in client assets through relationships with high-net-worth individuals, family foundations, and institutional investors who required sophisticated investment strategies and comprehensive financial planning services. The communication challenge involved developing brand identity systems that would support business development objectives while maintaining regulatory compliance requirements and professional service industry standards that influenced client perception and trust development. The creative strategy needed to communicate both investment expertise and personal relationship capabilities that distinguished Cornerstone from larger institutional competitors, who might offer similar financial products through less personalized service approaches. Understanding these project requirements revealed the complexity of corporate creative work that extended far beyond aesthetic design considerations to encompass business strategy, regulatory compliance, competitive analysis, and client psychology principles that influenced purchasing decisions in professional services markets. The strategic depth required for successful project outcomes explained why Meridian was seeking collaboration with creative professionals who had demonstrated analytical capabilities alongside artistic expertise. The consultation concluded with discussion of collaboration terms and project management approaches that would govern the partnership relationship. Lauren explained that Meridian's preferred working model involved collaborative development of creative strategies with shared responsibility for client relationship management and project outcome accountability. This approach differed significantly from traditional subcontracting arrangements that typically limited freelance involvement to execution of predetermined creative concepts. The partnership structure would provide access to Meridian's client relationships, project management systems, and business development resources while allowing creative professionals to maintain independent practice capabilities and intellectual property ownership for strategic methodologies developed through collaborative projects. The arrangement offered potential benefits for both parties, while creating opportunities for long-term relationship development that could evolve beyond individual project boundaries. However, the collaboration also presented challenges that required careful consideration before making commitment decisions. Working with established agencies involved navigating organizational cultures, decision-making processes, and client relationship protocols that might differ significantly from independent practice approaches I had developed through direct client interaction experience. The potential for creative differences, timeline conflicts, or strategic disagreements created risks that could affect both immediate project outcomes and long-term professional reputation considerations. Corporate clients expected seamless service delivery and consistent communication quality that required effective coordination between agency staff and external collaborators, regardless of individual working style preferences or creative methodology differences. Despite these concerns, the opportunity represented exactly the kind of professional development experience that could accelerate career advancement while providing exposure to corporate client environments that typically remained inaccessible to independent practitioners. The Cornerstone project would demonstrate my capabilities for handling complex strategic consulting assignments while building relationships within Chicago's established creative services community. The decision to accept the collaboration invitation was influenced by recognition that professional growth required calculated risks and willingness to adapt established working methods to new environmental requirements. The partnership with Meridian represented a bridge between independent practice experience and corporate creative leadership opportunities that might emerge through successful project execution and relationship development. Following the consultation meeting, I spent several days researching Cornerstone investments, organizational history, client service approach, and competitive positioning within Chicago's financial services landscape. The analysis revealed a firm that had achieved consistent growth through relationship-based service delivery and conservative investment strategies that appealed to clients who prioritized wealth preservation over aggressive return maximization. The research also indicated that Cornerstone was experiencing generational transition challenges as founding partners approached retirement, while younger professionals assumed increased responsibility for client relationship management and business development activities. The organizational expansion into wealth management and estate planning represented strategic adaptation to evolving client needs, while creating opportunities for differentiation from competitors who maintained narrow focus on investment advisory services. Understanding these organizational dynamics provided context for developing communication strategies that would support Cornerstone's business objectives while addressing the complex stakeholder relationships that influence success in professional services markets. The creative challenge required balancing tradition and innovation, stability and growth, institutional credibility and personal accessibility in ways that would resonate with diverse client segments and market positioning requirements. The project briefing materials included detailed information about Cornerstone's current client communication approaches, competitive analysis findings, and strategic planning objectives that would guide brand identity development over the following 18 months. The documentation revealed sophisticated business planning processes and analytical capabilities that exceeded my expectations for financial services firms of Cornerstone's size and market focus. The thoroughness of Cornerstone's strategic planning suggested that the client would demand equally sophisticated creative strategy development and implementation capabilities. The project would require professional performance standards and deliverable quality levels that matched corporate client expectations, while demonstrating creative excellence that justified premium pricing and long-term relationship development. The opportunity represented both professional validation and significant responsibility that would influence my career trajectory regardless of immediate project outcomes. Success would establish credibility within Chicago's corporate creative services community, while demonstrating capabilities for handling complex strategic consulting assignments that could generate additional partnership opportunities with established agencies and direct corporate client relationships. However, the project also created pressure to perform at professional standards that exceeded previous client experience levels while navigating organizational dynamics and decision-making processes that differed significantly from independent practice environments. The learning curve would be steep and the margin for error minimal given the client's expectations and Meridian's reputation considerations. The decision to proceed with the collaboration represented a calculated career development investment that could accelerate professional advancement while providing exposure to corporate client environments and strategic consulting opportunities that aligned with my long-term career objectives. The partnership with Meridian offered resources, relationships, and project management support that would enable focusing on creative strategy development rather than administrative responsibilities that typically consumed significant time and energy in independent practice. The Cornerstone project would prove to be the catalyst that transformed my professional trajectory from freelance creative services to corporate strategic consulting, though the full implications of this career development would not become apparent until several months later, when the collaboration's success generated additional opportunities that I could never have anticipated when accepting Lauren Mitchell's initial consultation request. The 3 months following my initial collaboration with Meridian Creative Solutions provided an intensive education in corporate strategic consulting that fundamentally transformed my understanding of how creative work functioned within established business environments. The Cornerstone Investments project demanded analytical rigor and strategic thinking capabilities that exceeded anything I had encountered in my freelance practice, requiring systematic approaches to research, stakeholder analysis, and solution development that would influence my professional methodology for years to come. My first assignment involved conducting comprehensive market research to understand competitive positioning dynamics within Chicago's financial services sector. This analysis required examining not only direct competitors who offered similar investment advisory services, but also adjacent service providers who might be expanding their offerings to overlap with Cornerstone's target market segments. The research methodology combined quantitative data analysis with qualitative assessment of brand messaging strategies, client communication approaches, and market positioning statements that revealed underlying business strategies and competitive advantages. The research process introduced me to professional database systems and analytical software applications that provided access to industry reports, financial performance data, and market trend analysis that would have been prohibitively expensive for independent practitioners to access. Learning to navigate these research tools efficiently while extracting actionable insights required developing systematic approaches to information synthesis and strategic analysis that complemented my existing creative problem-solving capabilities. The competitive analysis revealed that Chicago's financial services market was experiencing significant consolidation pressures as larger institutional firms acquired smaller advisory practices, while independent advisors struggled to maintain competitive service delivery capabilities against better-resourced competitors. This market environment created opportunities for mid-sized firms like Cornerstone to differentiate themselves through specialized service offerings and personalized client relationship approaches that larger competitors might not be able to provide effectively. However, the research also indicated that successful differentiation strategies required sophisticated marketing communication capabilities and brand development expertise that many financial services firms lacked internally. The opportunity for creative services providers involved helping these organizations develop communication strategies that could compete effectively against larger competitors while maintaining authentic brand identities that reflected their actual service delivery capabilities and organizational values. Understanding these market dynamics provided context for developing creative strategies that addressed real business challenges rather than pursuing aesthetic objectives that might not support measurable client outcomes. The strategic approach required balancing creative innovation with industry convention, ensuring that communication materials would resonate with target audiences who had established expectations about professional services marketing, while differentiating Cornerstone from competitors who might be using similar messaging approaches. The second phase of the project involved conducting extensive stakeholder interviews to understand internal organizational dynamics and decision-making processes that would influence brand identity implementation success. These interviews required diplomatic skills and analytical capabilities that extended far beyond traditional creative consultation approaches, involving complex organizational psychology and change management considerations that affected how communication strategies would be received and implemented across different business functions. The stakeholder research revealed that Cornerstone was experiencing generational transition challenges that affected everything from client service delivery approaches to internal communication systems and strategic planning processes. Senior partners who had founded the firm maintained traditional relationship-based business development approaches, while younger associates preferred systematic marketing strategies and technology-enabled client communication systems that could support business growth without requiring proportional increases in professional staff. These different perspectives on business development strategy created internal tensions that needed to be addressed through brand identity development that could support both relationship-based and systematized client acquisition approaches simultaneously. The creative challenge involved developing communication frameworks flexible enough to accommodate different professional styles while maintaining consistent organizational identity across all client interaction points. The stakeholder interviews also revealed complex client relationship dynamics that influenced how Cornerstone services were perceived and evaluated by different market segments. High-net-worth individuals who comprised the firm's primary client base expected personalized attention and customized investment strategies that reflected their specific financial objectives and risk tolerance preferences. However, these clients also increasingly demanded sophisticated portfolio management capabilities and comprehensive financial planning services that required technological infrastructure and analytical expertise that distinguished professional financial advisors from traditional stockbrokers or insurance salespeople. Understanding these client expectations required developing communication strategies that demonstrated both personal relationship capabilities and technical expertise simultaneously, avoiding the perception that emphasis on either approach represented deficiency in the other area. The brand identity system needed to communicate competence without intimidation, sophistication without exclusivity, and personalization without unprofessionalism. The stakeholder research process also provided insights into regulatory compliance requirements that significantly influenced how financial services firms could market their capabilities and communicate with potential clients. The securities industry operated under strict regulatory oversight that limited promotional messaging approaches, while requiring extensive disclosure statements and risk warnings that affected the design and content of all client-facing materials. These regulatory constraints created creative challenges that required understanding complex legal frameworks while developing communication strategies that remained compelling and effective despite mandatory compliance language that might detract from marketing objectives. The solution involved integrating regulatory requirements seamlessly into overall design concepts rather than treating compliance elements as separate obligations that competed with creative objectives. The third phase of the project involved developing comprehensive brand identity systems that addressed the complex requirements identified through market research and stakeholder analysis. This work required mastering advanced design software applications and project management systems that enabled efficient development of multiple communication materials while maintaining quality control and consistency across diverse output formats. The brand development process began with strategic positioning statements that articulated Cornerstone's competitive advantages and value proposition in language that could be adapted for different audience segments and communication contexts. These positioning statements required extensive collaboration with Cornerstone's leadership team to ensure accuracy and authenticity while developing messaging frameworks that supported business development objectives and competitive differentiation strategies. The visual identity development involved creating comprehensive design systems that could be implemented across traditional print materials, digital platforms, and environmental applications while maintaining consistency and professional appearance standards required for financial services marketing. The design process required understanding color psychology principles, typography selection criteria, and layout composition approaches that would appeal to target audience demographics while communicating appropriate levels of sophistication and trustworthiness. The brand identity system also included detailed implementation guidelines that provided clear direction for future material development, while ensuring consistent application of design elements across different communication contexts and media formats. These guidelines required anticipating various application scenarios and providing specific instructions for maintaining brand consistency while accommodating practical production constraints and budget limitations. The project's technical requirements introduced me to advanced digital asset management systems and collaborative workflow processes that enabled multiple team members to contribute to projects simultaneously while maintaining version control and quality assurance standards. Learning these systems required adapting to corporate project management approaches that differed significantly from independent practice methods, while developing capabilities that would prove essential for managing complex strategic consulting assignments. The collaboration with Meridian's internal team provided exposure to agency culture and professional development approaches that complemented my existing skills, while revealing different perspectives on creative work and client relationship management. Working within established organizational structures required understanding hierarchy dynamics, decision-making processes, and communication protocols that affected project development timelines and approval procedures. However, the agency environment also provided resources and collaborative opportunities that enhanced creative development capabilities, while enabling access to specialized expertise in areas such as digital platform development, marketing research, and strategic business consulting that would have been difficult to access as an independent practitioner. The most valuable aspect of the collaboration involved working directly with experienced creative directors and strategic consultants who provided mentorship and professional development guidance that accelerated my understanding of corporate consulting approaches and client relationship management strategies. These relationships provided insights into industry best practices and career development pathways that enabled strategic planning for long-term professional advancement within creative services sectors. The Cornerstone project's success was demonstrated through measurable business outcomes that validated the strategic approach to brand development and creative consulting. Client acquisition rates increased by 46% during the 6 months following brand identity implementation. New client average asset sizes grew by 32% compared to previous acquisition patterns. Client retention rates improved significantly as existing relationships were strengthened through enhanced communication materials and systematic relationship management approaches. These results established the effectiveness of strategic creative consulting approaches, while demonstrating the value of thorough research and analytical problem-solving in developing communication solutions that supported specific business objectives rather than pursuing purely aesthetic goals. The success also validated collaborative working relationships between independent creative professionals and established agencies as effective models for delivering sophisticated strategic consulting services to corporate clients. The project's positive outcomes generated additional collaboration opportunities with Meridian, while establishing my reputation within Chicago's corporate creative services community as a strategic consultant capable of managing complex organizational communication challenges. The referral network that developed through this work provided consistent project opportunities while exposing me to diverse industry sectors and communication challenges that continued expanding my professional expertise and analytical capabilities. However, the most significant outcome of the cornerstone collaboration was the relationship it established with Meridian Creative Solutions leadership team, who recognized the strategic value of my analytical approach and stakeholder management capabilities for addressing increasingly complex client consultation requirements. This relationship would prove crucial several months later, when organizational changes within Meridian created opportunities for expanded collaboration that would fundamentally alter my professional trajectory in ways I could not have anticipated when accepting the initial project consultation request. The systematic investigation and strategic analysis capabilities I developed through the Cornerstone project provided essential preparation for corporate leadership responsibilities that would emerge through subsequent collaboration opportunities with Meridian. The combination of creative expertise and business consulting capabilities distinguished my professional profile while positioning me for advancement opportunities within established creative services organizations that required both strategic thinking and implementation capabilities. The deepening understanding of corporate communication challenges and stakeholder management complexities prepared me for navigating organizational dynamics and decision-making processes that would prove essential when the opportunity arose to transition from collaborative consultant to internal leadership roles within the expanding creative services industry. The professional relationships that developed through my expanding work with Meridian Creative Solutions provided essential context for understanding how corporate advancement occurs through networks of mutual recognition and collaborative achievement rather than individual merit alone. These connections would prove crucial not only for my immediate career development, but also for the complex dynamics that would ultimately intersect with my family relationships in ways that none of us could have anticipated. Dr. Sarah Chen, Meridian's Chief Strategy Officer, emerged as the most influential mentor relationship of my professional development during this transformative period. Sarah had built her career through systematic advancement within management consulting before transitioning to creative services leadership, bringing analytical frameworks and strategic planning methodologies that distinguished Meridian from competitors who relied primarily on creative intuition and industry experience for client consultation approaches. Sarah's background included MBA education from Wharton and 8 years with McKinsey & Company, where she had developed expertise in organizational transformation and strategic planning for Fortune 500 companies undergoing market disruption and competitive challenges. Her decision to join Meridian reflected recognition that creative services were becoming increasingly strategic business functions rather than purely aesthetic or promotional activities, requiring leadership with both creative sensibility and rigorous analytical capabilities. Our initial collaboration occurred during the Cornerstone Investments project when Sarah was evaluating whether Meridian should expand their service offerings to include strategic consulting capabilities that could command premium pricing, while differentiating the agency from competitors who focused primarily on traditional advertising and promotional campaign development. My analytical approach to the Cornerstone project demonstrated exactly the kind of systematic thinking that Sarah believed necessary for successful strategic consulting practice. Sarah's mentorship approach combined structured professional development with organic relationship building that reflected her understanding of how successful careers develop through sustained excellence, rather than dramatic breakthrough moments. She provided access to advanced business strategy frameworks while encouraging creative application of these methodologies to communication challenges that required both analytical rigor and aesthetic judgment. The relationship developed through regular consultation meetings where Sarah shared insights about corporate decision-making processes, client relationship management strategies, and industry trends that influenced strategic planning for creative services organizations. These discussions provided education about business leadership that complemented my creative expertise while revealing opportunities for professional advancement that aligned with my analytical interests and collaborative working preferences. Sarah also introduced me to her professional network within Chicago's business community, facilitating relationships with corporate executives, nonprofit leaders, and entrepreneurial professionals who might require strategic consulting services that combined creative capabilities with business analysis expertise. These introductions provided access to potential clients and collaboration opportunities that would have been difficult to develop through traditional marketing approaches or industry networking events. The second crucial relationship developed with Marcus Torres, Meridian's Director of Business Development, whose responsibility for client acquisition and relationship management provided insights into how corporate sales processes function within professional services environments. Marcus had built his career through progressive advancement within advertising agencies before joining Meridian to develop systematic business development approaches that could support the agency's growth objectives while maintaining quality standards for client selection and project development. Marcus's approach to business development combined traditional relationship-building strategies with analytical assessment of market opportunities and competitive positioning considerations that influenced client targeting and proposal development. His systematic methodology provided education about how successful business development occurs through consistent professional activity rather than sporadic marketing efforts or passive referral generation approaches. Working with Marcus on client proposal development and presentation strategies taught me essential skills for communicating complex strategic concepts to corporate decision-makers who might lack creative industry background while needing sufficient information to evaluate service providers and make informed purchasing decisions. These communication skills would prove essential for eventually managing direct client relationships and representing organizational capabilities in competitive business development contexts. Marcus also provided insights into industry compensation structures and career advancement pathways that helped me understand how creative professionals could build financially sustainable careers within established organizations while maintaining creative integrity and professional autonomy. His guidance about negotiation strategies and performance evaluation criteria proved invaluable for navigating corporate advancement opportunities that emerged through subsequent collaboration success. The third significant relationship developed with Jennifer Walsh, Meridian's creative director, whose artistic leadership and industry experience provided balance to the strategic and business development perspectives offered by Sarah and Marcus. Jennifer had built her reputation through award-winning creative work for major consumer brands before joining Meridian to develop creative leadership capabilities that could support the agency's expansion into strategic consulting services. Jennifer's creative philosophy emphasized conceptual innovation balanced with strategic business objectives, requiring creative professionals to understand both aesthetic excellence and measurable business outcomes that justified creative investments for corporate clients. Her leadership approach combined artistic mentorship with professional development guidance that prepared creative professionals for advancement opportunities within corporate environments. Working with Jennifer on creative strategy development and artistic execution provided education about design leadership that extended beyond individual project management to encompass team development, quality assurance, and creative vision articulation that could guide complex projects involving multiple stakeholders and competing creative objectives. These leadership skills would prove essential when opportunities emerged for managing creative teams and representing creative perspectives in corporate strategic planning processes. Jennifer also provided insights into creative industry culture and professional development approaches specific to artistic careers within corporate environments. Her guidance about portfolio development, creative presentation strategies, and artistic career advancement helped me understand how creative excellence could be demonstrated and evaluated within business contexts that might not fully appreciate purely aesthetic achievements. The collaborative relationships with Sarah, Marcus, and Jennifer created a comprehensive support system that addressed strategic, business development, and creative leadership aspects of professional advancement within corporate creative services environments. Their combined mentorship provided education about organizational dynamics, client relationship management, and industry positioning that supplemented my freelance experience while preparing me for leadership responsibilities that required understanding multiple business functions simultaneously. However, these relationships also revealed potential conflicts and competitive dynamics that could complicate professional advancement within established organizations where individual success might be perceived as threatening to existing leadership or career advancement opportunities for current employees. Navigating these organizational politics required diplomatic skills and strategic thinking that extended beyond creative expertise to encompass relationship management and conflict resolution capabilities. The complexity of corporate relationship dynamics was further illustrated through my interactions with other agency staff members who had different perspectives on collaboration with external consultants and the implications of expanding strategic consulting capabilities for traditional creative services business models. Some team members viewed strategic consulting as natural evolution that could enhance agency capabilities, while others worried that emphasis on business analysis might diminish focus on creative excellence and artistic innovation. These different perspectives reflected broader industry tensions about the role of creative work within business environments, and whether creative professionals should prioritize artistic integrity or commercial effectiveness when these objectives might conflict. Understanding these philosophical differences required developing diplomatic communication skills and collaborative problem-solving approaches that could address competing priorities while maintaining productive working relationships. The agency environment also provided exposure to client relationship dynamics that differed significantly from independent practice experience, involving multiple stakeholders, complex approval processes, and competing organizational objectives that influenced creative strategy development and implementation success. Learning to navigate these corporate client relationships required understanding business hierarchy, decision-making authority, and internal politics that affected project outcomes, regardless of creative quality or strategic effectiveness. The most challenging aspect of corporate relationship management involved understanding how individual professional advancement intersected with organizational objectives and team dynamics in ways that could create conflicts between personal career development and collaborative project success. These considerations required strategic thinking about career development that balanced individual achievement with team collaboration and organizational loyalty. The experience working within Meridian's organizational structure also provided insights into corporate culture development and leadership approaches that would prove essential when opportunities emerged for advancing to executive leadership positions that required understanding organizational dynamics from management perspectives rather than individual contributor viewpoints. These leadership insights prepared me for responsibilities that would eventually include team development, strategic planning, and organizational culture development. The professional relationships developed through Meridian collaboration created a foundation for understanding corporate advancement that extended beyond individual skill development to encompass relationship building, strategic positioning, and organizational contribution that distinguished successful executives from competent individual contributors. These relationships would prove essential when circumstances created opportunities for leadership advancement that required both creative expertise and business management capabilities. The support system that emerged through these professional relationships provided not only immediate mentorship and career development guidance, but also long-term advocacy and reference relationships that would influence future advancement opportunities and professional reputation development within Chicago's creative services community. The investment in relationship building that occurred during this period established credibility and trust that would prove invaluable when opportunities emerged for significant career advancement. These relationships also provided alternative perspectives on success, professional satisfaction, and career development that helped me evaluate opportunities according to criteria that extended beyond financial compensation to include creative fulfillment, professional growth, and organizational impact considerations that would influence long-term career satisfaction and personal development objectives. The comprehensive support system enabled strategic decision-making about career advancement that balanced multiple considerations, rather than focusing exclusively on immediate advancement opportunities. The 18-month period following my successful collaboration on the Cornerstone Investments project marked a fundamental transformation in both my professional capabilities and internal understanding of my value within corporate strategic consulting environments. The systematic development of expertise through increasingly complex assignments provided concrete validation that the analytical and creative skills I had developed through independent practice could compete effectively with traditional business education and conventional career advancement paths. The evolution began with Dr. Sarah Chen's decision to assign me leadership responsibility for developing Meridian's strategic consulting service offerings, a role that required translating my project-specific successes into repeatable methodologies that could be applied across diverse client types and industry sectors. This assignment represented recognition that my approach to creative problem-solving had strategic value that extended beyond individual project outcomes to encompass organizational capability development. The service development process required analyzing the common elements underlying successful strategic consulting engagements, while identifying the specific capabilities that distinguished effective consultation from routine creative services delivery. This analysis involved systematic review of client feedback, project outcome measurements, and competitive positioning assessments that revealed patterns in successful client relationship development and strategic problem-solving approaches. The research process confirmed that clients increasingly valued creative professionals who could function as strategic business consultants rather than vendors executing predetermined creative concepts. Organizations facing market disruption, competitive challenges, and regulatory changes required communication strategy development that addressed complex stakeholder relationships and multifaceted business objectives that traditional advertising approaches could not adequately support. The strategic consulting methodology that emerged from this analysis combined systematic business analysis with creative strategy development in ways that provided clients with both analytical rigor and innovative solutions. The approach required mastering advanced research techniques, stakeholder assessment frameworks, and strategic planning methodologies that complemented creative expertise, while ensuring that artistic recommendations served measurable business objectives. Implementing this methodology across multiple client engagements required developing training materials and process documentation that enabled other creative professionals to apply strategic consulting approaches consistently while adapting to specific client circumstances and industry requirements. The development of these standardized approaches demonstrated that creative work could be systematized without compromising artistic quality or innovative problem-solving capabilities. The first major test of the strategic consulting methodology occurred through an engagement with Midwest Regional Bank, a community financial institution facing competitive pressure from national banking corporations and technology-enabled financial services providers. The bank's leadership recognized that traditional relationship-based banking approaches required enhancement through sophisticated marketing communications and strategic positioning that could compete effectively against better-resourced competitors. The consultation assignment required comprehensive analysis of regional banking market dynamics, consumer preference trends, and regulatory environment changes that influenced community bank positioning strategies. The research revealed that successful community banks were differentiating themselves through specialized service offerings and personalized relationship management that larger competitors could not provide effectively due to operational scale and standardized service delivery requirements. However, communicating these competitive advantages required strategic positioning and marketing communications that could demonstrate both community connection and professional competence to diverse customer segments with different banking needs and service expectations. The creative challenge involved developing brand identity systems that conveyed local accessibility without suggesting limited capabilities or outdated service delivery approaches. The strategic solution combined traditional community banking values with contemporary service delivery capabilities through communication strategies that emphasized relationship continuity alongside technological innovation. The brand development process required extensive stakeholder consultation with bank management, customer focus groups, and community business leaders who could provide insights into local market preferences and competitive positioning considerations. The project's complexity required coordinating multiple research activities, creative development phases, and implementation timelines, while managing client expectations and internal approval processes that involved regulatory compliance review and board-level decision-making authority. The project management requirements exceeded anything I had encountered in previous consulting engagements, demanding advanced organizational skills and diplomatic relationship management capabilities. The successful completion of the Midwest Regional Bank engagement demonstrated my ability to manage complex strategic consulting assignments independently while delivering measurable business outcomes that justified premium consulting fees. Client deposit growth increased by 28% during the 12 months following brand identity implementation. New customer acquisition rates improved by 35% compared to previous marketing campaign results. customer retention metrics showed significant improvement as existing relationships were strengthened through enhanced communication approaches. These quantifiable results established credibility for strategic consulting methodologies, while validating the business value of combining creative expertise with analytical problem-solving approaches. The success also generated referral opportunities within the regional banking sector and broader financial services industry, creating demand for specialized consulting capabilities that addressed industry-specific communication challenges. The recognition of my strategic consulting capabilities within Meridian's organizational structure was formalized through promotion to Senior Strategic Consultant, a newly created position that acknowledged the distinction between traditional creative services delivery and strategic business consulting that commanded premium pricing, while requiring different expertise and client relationship management approaches. The promotion involved expanded responsibilities for business development activities, including client relationship management, proposal development, and strategic planning participation that influenced agency growth objectives and competitive positioning within Chicago's creative services marketplace. These responsibilities required understanding organizational strategy from management perspectives, while contributing to business development efforts that extended beyond individual project execution. The business development experience provided education about corporate sales processes, competitive analysis, and strategic positioning that complemented creative expertise while preparing me for leadership roles that required understanding organizational operations from executive perspectives rather than individual contributor viewpoints. The exposure to strategic planning and competitive analysis enhanced my understanding of how successful creative services organizations position themselves within industry ecosystems. The expanded role also involved mentoring other creative professionals who wanted to develop strategic consulting capabilities, providing experience with team leadership and professional development that prepared me for management responsibilities, requiring both technical expertise and interpersonal relationship management skills. The mentoring experience revealed the satisfaction that comes from helping others develop capabilities while contributing to organizational knowledge development and competitive advantage creation. The most significant professional development opportunity during this period involved leading Meridian's response to a competitive proposal process for providing strategic consulting services to Chicago Transit Authority, a complex organizational client with multiple stakeholder relationships, regulatory oversight requirements, and public accountability obligations that created communication challenges far exceeding typical corporate consulting assignments. The CTA engagement required understanding public sector communication constraints, political relationship dynamics, and community engagement requirements that differed substantially from corporate client consultation approaches. The strategic complexity involved balancing operational efficiency objectives with public service accessibility requirements, while addressing diverse community concerns about transit system development and service delivery priorities. The proposal development process required coordinating multiple expertise areas within Meridian, while demonstrating comprehensive understanding of public transportation communication challenges and strategic positioning considerations that would distinguish our approach from larger consulting firms, with greater resources but potentially less specialized expertise in creative strategy development. The successful acquisition of the CTA engagement represented validation of strategic consulting capabilities at the highest levels of public sector client relationships, while demonstrating that creative expertise combined with analytical rigor could compete effectively against traditional management consulting approaches. The project scope involved an 18-month timeline with potential for ongoing relationship development that could establish Meridian as a preferred strategic consulting provider for complex public sector communication challenges. Managing the CTA project required coordinating multiple project teams, external vendor relationships, and stakeholder approval processes while ensuring deliverable quality and timeline adherence despite changing political priorities and regulatory requirements that influenced project scope and implementation approaches. The project management complexity exceeded previous consulting experience while providing education about large-scale organizational change management and strategic implementation challenges. The project's successful execution demonstrated my capability for managing enterprise-level strategic consulting assignments while leading multidisciplinary teams and coordinating complex stakeholder relationships. The experience provided preparation for executive leadership responsibilities that required understanding organizational operations from strategic management perspectives while maintaining technical expertise in creative strategy development. The combination of individual project success, methodological development, team leadership experience, and complex client relationship management established my professional reputation within both Meridian's organizational structure and Chicago's broader creative services community. The recognition created opportunities for advancement that would fundamentally alter my career trajectory, while validating the strategic approach to professional development that had guided my decisions throughout this transformative period. The confidence that developed through systematic capability building and measurable achievement provided internal validation that complemented external recognition, creating psychological foundation for pursuing leadership opportunities that required both technical expertise and strategic vision. The evolution from independent creative practitioner to strategic consulting leader demonstrated that unconventional career paths could produce expertise and credibility that traditional advancement approaches might not provide as effectively. The pivotal moment that would transform my entire professional trajectory arrived through an unexpected phone call on a Thursday evening in November. I was reviewing strategic consulting proposals in my Logan Square apartment when Dr. Sarah Chin called with news that would fundamentally alter not only my career, but also my understanding of how opportunity intersects with preparation in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled. "Emma," Sarah's voice carried an urgency that immediately commanded attention. "We need to discuss a significant organizational development that will affect your role at Meridian. Can you meet me tomorrow morning at 7? This conversation requires complete confidentiality until we can present the information to relevant stakeholders." The cryptic nature of her request suggested developments beyond routine business planning or project management adjustments. Sarah's tone indicated strategic importance that could influence organizational structure and individual career trajectories in ways that demanded careful consideration and immediate response. The request for early morning meeting and confidentiality requirements suggested complexity that would require thorough discussion and strategic planning before broader organizational communication. The meeting took place in Sarah's private office before regular business hours began, providing privacy for conversations that might involve sensitive information about organizational changes, competitive developments, or strategic planning initiatives that required discretion until official announcements could be prepared and coordinated with appropriate stakeholders. Sarah began the conversation by providing context about Meridian's strategic planning process and the organizational evaluation that had been occurring over several months through consultation with external management advisors who specialized in creative services, industry development, and competitive positioning analysis. This evaluation had revealed opportunities for organizational expansion that aligned with market trends toward integrated strategic consulting services that combined creative expertise with business analysis capabilities. The evaluation confirmed what we have observed through our strategic consulting development, Sarah explained. Clients increasingly require creative professionals who can function as strategic business partners, rather than service providers executing predetermined concepts. The market opportunity exists for creative services organizations that can provide comprehensive strategic consulting alongside traditional creative services delivery. The strategic analysis had identified specific organizational capabilities that would be required for successful market positioning within integrated strategic consulting services. These capabilities included advanced analytical methodologies, systematic client consultation approaches, and leadership expertise that could coordinate complex multidisciplinary projects while maintaining quality standards for both creative excellence and strategic business outcomes. Your development of strategic consulting methodologies and successful management of complex client engagements demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership capabilities that would be essential for expanding our strategic consulting services. Sarah continued. The board has been evaluating organizational structure options that would support this expansion while maintaining our reputation for creative excellence. The organizational evaluation had revealed that successful expansion into strategic consulting services would require leadership appointments that combined proven strategic consulting expertise with understanding of creative industry dynamics and client relationship management capabilities. The leadership requirements exceeded traditional creative services management approaches while demanding integration of business strategy and artistic vision that few professionals possess simultaneously. Sarah's explanation revealed that Meridian's board had been evaluating candidates for a newly created creative director position that would have responsibility for strategic consulting service development, major client relationship management, and organizational strategic planning that influenced competitive positioning within Chicago's evolving creative services marketplace. The position represented recognition that creative services leadership required different expertise than traditional agency management approaches. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.